When people think about the fall of Rome, their minds conjure images of barbarian hordes pounding at the gates, legions collapsing under pressure, or emperors meeting their end in grand marble palaces. It's dramatic, cinematic, and easy to imagine. But history rarely collapses in a single violent moment. Empires crumble from within long before the enemy arrives. One of the most corrosive forces that can bring down a civilization is not a sword, it is money. Rome did not fall simply because of invasions, political corruption, or civil strife. It fell because the very foundation of its economy, the trust and value in its currency, collapsed. The story of Rome's monetary decline is not just ancient history. It is a lesson for every modern economy tempted to treat money as a game. Let's begin at the beginning. For centuries, the backbone of Rome's economy was the silver denarius. First minted around 201 BC, it was nearly pure silver. It was trusted across the empire, from the bustling markets of Rome to the distant provinces along the Rhine and Danube. Roman soldiers received their pay in denarii, merchants insisted on it, and ordinary citizens stored their wealth in it. The coin was more than money, it was confidence in tangible form. Rome's power and the denarius's value were inseparable. As long as people trusted the empire, they trusted the coin. But sustaining an empire is expensive. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was stretched to its limits. Legions needed constant funding, infrastructure like roads and aqueducts had to be maintained, and costly wars demanded endless resources. Tax revenues could not keep pace. To meet obligations, emperors resorted to a familiar tactic: debasement. Instead of increasing taxes, which was always unpopular and politically risky, they reduced the silver content in the denarius. This was not a subtle change. The coins looked the same but were worth less in real terms. The numbers tell the story clearly. Under Emperor Augustus, at the dawn of the empire, the denarius contained approximately 95% silver. By the early 3rd century under Emperor Caracalla, the silver content had fallen to roughly 50%. By the mid-3rd century, during the reign of Emperor Gallienus, it contained less than 5% silver. A coin that had once been solid silver was now little more than a bronze core covered in a thin silver wash. The people could see it, feel it, and they understood its implications immediately. Inflation followed naturally. As coins lost intrinsic value, prices soared. A measure of wheat that once cost a single denarius could now cost dozens. This was not abstract theory. It reshaped daily life for ordinary Romans. Soldiers demanded higher pay just to survive. Merchants often refused the debased coins, resorting instead to barter or payments in gold. Local economies returned to direct trade because trust in the official currency had evaporated. And in a vicious feedback loop, as confidence in the money decreased, emperors issued even cheaper coins, hoping that more volume would compensate for less value. The process fed itself, creating a cycle of economic decline that we can recognize in many later crises. The debasement crisis peaked during the crisis of the 3rd century. From 235 to 284 AD, a period often described as Rome's darkest era. During these 50 years, the empire faced continuous civil wars, invasions from Germanic tribes, Parthian threats in the east, plagues, and economic collapse. Emperors rose and fell at dizzying speed, sometimes holding power for only months before being assassinated. Behind the political instability was a financial catastrophe. Taxes were levied in coins that were losing value faster than they could be collected. Farmers abandoned their lands rather than pay, and trade networks disintegrated. The Roman state tried desperate measures, from price controls to forced labor, in an attempt to stabilize the economy, but none of these measures worked. One notable example was Emperor Diocletian's edict on maximum prices. Issued in 301 AD, this law attempted to fix the prices of over 1,000 goods and services, ranging from grain to wages for labor. Violators faced the death penalty. But controlling prices by decree when the currency itself is worthless is impossible. The black market flourished, official trade collapsed, and the law quickly became a symbol of futility. People learned the hard way that no law could restore value to a broken coin. Eventually, the denarius was abandoned entirely. Around 312 AD, Constantine the Great introduced the solidus, a gold coin of consistent purity. The solidus restored some stability and lasted for centuries in the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. But by that time, the Western Empire was irreversibly weakened. The debasement of the denarius had hollowed out Rome's economic core. Armies could no longer be reliably paid. Trade networks were fractured. Trust, once the lifeblood of the empire, was gone. Rome's fall was not the result of a single catastrophic event. It was a slow unraveling, and currency collapse was one of the sharpest threads in that unraveling. The lesson is stark. When money is destroyed, society itself is at risk. Even today, the same patterns echo. Rome thought it could deceive its citizens by issuing coins that looked identical but contained less value. Modern governments experiment with similar tricks, whether through printing paper money, manipulating interest rates, or inflating away debt. The outcome is remarkably consistent. Wealth is destroyed, trust collapses, and the people pay the cost. The Denarius crisis provides not just a cautionary tale but a blueprint for understanding later economic disasters. The cycle is repeated in history, from Germany after World War I to Zimbabwe in the early 2000s, and even in modern developed economies, the same risks persist. By the mid-3rd century AD, Rome was in turmoil. The empire faced threats on every frontier, from Germanic tribes pressing on the Rhine and Danube to Persian forces in the east. Internal strife compounded the danger. Emperors were frequently overthrown or assassinated, sometimes within months of taking power. Behind this political chaos, a far deeper crisis was unfolding: a financial and economic collapse that weakened Rome from the inside out. The denarius, once the trusted backbone of Roman commerce, had been debased to near worthlessness. The link between currency and confidence, once unbreakable, was severed. Ordinary people struggled to buy food, soldiers demanded ever higher pay, and merchants increasingly rejected official coinage. Markets shifted back to barter. Local trade networks replaced imperial ones because the money that was supposed to facilitate exchange had become meaningless. This was not a temporary inconvenience, it was systemic failure. Emperors tried a variety of desperate solutions. Diocletian, who came to power in 284 AD, recognized the depth of the crisis and attempted reforms to stabilize the empire. Among his most famous measures was the Edict on Maximum Prices, issued in 301 AD. Diocletian attempted to cap the prices of over 1,000 goods and services, from wheat and olive oil to wages for laborers. Violators faced the death penalty. The idea was straightforward: stop inflation by law. But the law could not change reality. When currency itself is devalued, fixing prices on paper is futile. Black markets flourished, merchants hoarded goods, and trade nearly ground to a halt. Ordinary Romans learned a harsh lesson. Government decrees cannot restore value when the underlying currency is worthless. Trust, once lost, is almost impossible to rebuild. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius and introduced the solidus, a gold coin of reliable purity. Constantine's reforms in the early 4th century stabilized the Eastern Empire economically for centuries. But for the Western Empire, it was too late. The debasement of currency had fatally weakened its infrastructure. Armies could no longer be reliably financed, trade networks had broken down, and societal trust had evaporated. Rome did not fall in a single catastrophic moment. It unraveled slowly, and one of the sharpest threads in that unraveling was its currency collapse. The Roman experience is more than a historical curiosity. It's a cautionary tale repeated throughout history. Governments tempted to spend beyond their means often resort to monetary shortcuts. Printing money, inflating debts, or issuing currency without backing may seem convenient in the short term, but the long-term consequences are predictable. The people ultimately bear the cost, while elites who hold tangible assets, land, property, gold, or other resources are largely insulated. Consider Germany after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles imposed crushing reparations on the fledgling Weimar Republic. The government sought a quick fix: printing marks to cover its obligations. Initially, this seemed manageable, but the cycle of debasement and inflation quickly escalated. By 1923, Germany faced hyperinflation on a scale almost unimaginable. A loaf of bread that had cost 1 mark before the war now cost over 200 billion marks. Ordinary citizens carried wages home in wheelbarrows. Savings evaporated overnight. Just like Rome, those with real assets, land, factories, foreign currency, emerged largely unscathed, while the majority suffered catastrophic losses. The economic despair created fertile ground for extremism, setting the stage for Hitler's rise. Another stark example came in Zimbabwe during the early 2000s. The government faced falling production, economic mismanagement, and escalating debt. Their response was familiar: print more money. By 2008, inflation had reached astronomical levels, measured in the billions of percent annually. Prices doubled every day. Shops could not update their price tags quickly enough. Eventually, Zimbabwe abandoned its own currency entirely, forcing citizens to conduct trade in US dollars or South African rand. Once again, the government attempted to cheat reality. Once again, ordinary people paid the price. Even in modern, developed economies, the Roman pattern persists, though in less extreme form. Take the United States. In 1971, President Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, severing the last tangible link between currency and a real asset. From that moment, the dollar became a fiat currency, backed only by trust in the government. The temptation to spend beyond means increased. Debt ballooned, the money supply expanded, and inflation became a constant undercurrent. While we have not yet seen wheelbarrows of cash, the value of money has steadily eroded. $1 in 1971 buys what now costs over $6. Coins and bills look the same, but their purchasing power has declined substantially. The mechanisms are familiar. Governments disguise inflation as growth. Rising wages are presented as prosperity, even when costs increase faster. Public debt is framed as investment, even when it funds consumption. Stock market gains are celebrated as wealth creation, even when the majority of citizens own little or no equities. The parallels with Rome are striking. The emperors pretended that nothing fundamental had changed while quietly extracting value from every coin, every paycheck, every transaction. Today, the scale is global. Rome's collapse was an imperial crisis. Germany's hyperinflation was national. Zimbabwe's was local. Modern economies, however, are interconnected. Fiat currencies, massive debt loads, and central banks capable of printing trillions of dollars or euros mean that a monetary collapse is no longer confined to a single state. The next major failure could ripple across continents, affecting millions worldwide. Those who will suffer most are not the elites with real assets, but ordinary people relying on salaries, pensions, and savings denominated in increasingly fragile currencies. So what lessons can we draw from Rome and its modern echoes? First, understand that inflation is rarely accidental. It is often deliberate policy, a silent tax that has eroded wealth and destroyed trust for thousands of years. Second, real wealth is found in assets that retain value independent of currency. Land, productive businesses, skills, and tangible resources are shields against the erosion of paper money. Third, never assume stability is permanent. The Romans, Germans, and Zimbabweans all believed that their money and systems were reliable until they were not. Trust can vanish rapidly, and the collapse often seems sudden only in hindsight. Rome's currency crisis is a timeless warning. Financial systems can fail slowly, then suddenly. Trust in money is fragile. When it disappears, contracts fail, trade collapses, armies weaken, and governments lose legitimacy. The barbarians at the gate may deliver the final blow, but the real collapse originates inside the treasury. The story of Rome does not end in the ancient past. The collapse of the Denarius echoes through centuries, appearing in Germany after World War I, Zimbabwe in the 2000s, and even in modern economies like the United States. The lesson is clear: the destruction of money is the destruction of society. Trust, once broken, cannot be recreated by printing more paper, issuing new coins, or passing laws. Money is a social contract, and when that contract fails, everyone pays. Take the United States as a case study. In 1971, President Nixon severed the last link between the dollar and gold. The dollar became a fiat currency, backed solely by trust in government institutions. Suddenly, money was no longer tied to a tangible asset. This created enormous freedom for policymakers. They could expand the money supply at will, fund deficits, and attempt to manage the economy using interest rates and debt. At first glance, this seems convenient. But convenience comes at a cost. Over time, steady inflation erodes purchasing power. Wages may rise, but so do costs. Savings lose value. Debt becomes easier to service, but ordinary people pay indirectly through higher prices. The mechanics mirror Rome almost perfectly. Just as Roman emperors debased coins to pay their armies and fund construction, modern governments expand the money supply to cover deficits and stimulate spending. Citizens are told that rising stock markets, GDP growth, or increased wages represent prosperity, even as the real value of their money declines. Those with assets, property, gold, stocks, or businesses benefit, while the majority, whose wealth is tied to cash, pensions, or salaries, lose ground. The cycle is the same. Value is quietly extracted from every coin and every paycheck. Global debt magnifies the risk. Unlike Rome, today's economies are interconnected. Currencies, trade, and finance operate on a planetary scale. A monetary collapse in one region can ripple worldwide, affecting everyone. Central banks print trillions of dollars or euros at the first sign of crisis, attempting to stabilize markets. But every new dollar, euro, or yen issued is another step in a long game that can erode trust if mismanaged. Rome's lesson is simple. The stability of currency underpins the stability of society. Ignore it, and society itself becomes fragile. So what should you, as an individual, take away from this? The first step is awareness. Inflation is not an accident. It is policy. Recognizing that money's value can decline and often does is crucial. Once you understand that, you can take steps to protect yourself. Real wealth is not in digits on a screen or paper currency. It is in assets that retain value regardless of monetary fluctuations. Consider land, productive businesses, precious metals, and tangible resources. Skills and knowledge are also a form of wealth. They allow you to create value, earn income, and adapt in times of economic instability. These are shields against the erosion of money. Diversification is essential. Just as the Romans who held gold or traded directly in silver avoided some of the chaos, modern individuals who spread wealth across currencies, assets, and investments reduce risk. Holding everything in cash, pension accounts, or a single currency exposes you to the same danger that destroyed ordinary Romans. Timing and vigilance matter too. Rome's Denarius did not collapse overnight. The process was slow and observable if one paid attention. The warning signs were there: reduced silver content, rise in prices, soldiers demanding higher pay, and merchants refusing debased coins. In today's terms, these signs appear as rising inflation, unsustainable debt, and central banks creating money faster than economic growth. Observing trends and adjusting before a crisis hits is a strategy the Romans never had the chance to employ effectively. Finally, never assume stability is permanent. The first-century Romans believed their coins were unshakable. Germans in 1913 assumed the mark was reliable. Zimbabweans in the 1980s trusted that independence would secure prosperity. In every case, confidence vanished faster than expected. Money is only valuable if people trust it, and that trust can disappear suddenly. The collapse of Rome's currency was not simply about greed, corruption, or political failure. It was about the fragility of money itself when misused by power. That fragility has never disappeared. History does not repeat perfectly, but patterns persist. Governments can experiment with fiscal and monetary policy, but the consequences of devaluing money are consistent. Wealth is destroyed, trust is lost, and ordinary people bear the cost. Understanding this gives you an advantage. By studying the past, you can make informed decisions about saving, investing, and protecting your wealth. Rome teaches that money is more than a medium of exchange, it is a pillar of civilization. When that pillar weakens, everything else falters. Armies, governments, trade networks, and everyday life are all at risk. The barbarians may finish the job, but the real collapse always begins in the treasury. The takeaway is simple but profound. Respect money, understand its fragility, diversify your wealth, and never ignore the early warning signs of currency decline. The story of Rome is not just history. It is a guide to navigating the financial risks of the present. Remember, history doesn't need to repeat for its lessons to apply. Rome's experience is still relevant. Trust in money is the foundation of any economy. When that trust fails, society itself begins to unravel. The denarius fell, and Rome followed. Understanding why gives us the knowledge to survive, and perhaps even thrive, in the economic challenges ahead.